we've all become virologists over the last couple of months and experts in germ theory. And well, it's in our faces so much, and there's a lot to decipher. And I hope to simplify a lot of the information and just make it relevant to today. So what is a naturopathic physician? I am among one of 4 medical boards in Arizona. We, of course, have the MDs that most of you are all familiar with, I'm sure, and the DOs. And then we have homeopathic MDs, which are integrative physicians. And then we have the most integrative of all the professions, which is naturopathic physicians. We are licensed healthcare practitioners. We have the ability to write prescriptions and do pretty much any type of primary care work. We, from the get-go in our training, we are ingrained, what's ingrained in us is these 6 principles you see on your screen right here. In other words, from the beginning, we are taught the opposite of what is known as the allopathic or the reductionist model in medicine. While we understand that model, we understand that the human organism is something much greater than just a subset of their symptoms to be treated by one or more particular chemicals or surgeries. So that's the big picture of it. These Latin terms here are the basic tenets by which we are all expected to uphold in part of our practice. I'll just go over them really briefly with you. The very first one is the very first of the Hippocratic Oath as well. We all take that, and that is primum non nocere, don't hurt anybody. First, do no harm. It's a basic tenet. And it's often overlooked in medicine because we often don't look into the side effects before we prescribe a lot of drugs and procedures. And that really should be the first thought. Is the cure worse than the cause or the disease that we're treating? This medicatrix nature is the healing power of nature, always remembering that nature and our relationship with nature is the most important, and really where healing truly happens. It's not drugs, it's not herbs, it's not vitamins, but it's really nature itself, herself, who has the ability to heal us. We carry the ability to produce disease as well as to heal disease. Tolle causa means look at the whole entire cause of the problem, not just the individual symptoms. Get to the cause of the problem, not just the surface. Docere is to teach. The physician is, among anything else, most importantly, is a teacher, an educator. And that's what we're doing here this evening. We're imparting information that is very crucial. Tolle totem means treating the whole person, not just with a reductionist, perspective, but instead with a holistic perspective. So we see everything. And for instance, if someone has a loss of appetite or they're not sleeping well, we want to know why they're, if they're not eating properly, what their eating habits are, exercise habits, what their thoughts are like. Everything is connected. It's very important to understand. Sure, we can just prescribe a pill like any other physician could, and many of us do, but really it's super important to get and look at the whole person. And we'll go over more of that. And then the last one, I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. That just means prevention. Prevention is hard to quantify. How do you measure prevention when a disease actually doesn't happen? Pretty interesting. So we often don't get credit when we're actually preventing disease. So Bo and I were throwing around some different names for our topic, and nature or nurture is one of the sort of ones we decided, let's look into this. In other words, is it genetics or is it lifestyle? Is one example of nature versus nurture. In other words, is it something that we're born with, or is it something that we do and accumulate over a course of a lifetime that determines our level of health and wellness? I could easily have called this nature versus science, because what science has become today is a very unique and an interesting model that has shaped us, not just through healthcare, but geopolitically and otherwise. We could also call it just sense versus nonsense. And a lot of fake news perhaps is out there, and sometimes it's pretty funny. And we see nothing more than great examples of that today and how people are dealing with this COVID-19 virus. Some very unique and, I would say, innovative ways of people dealing with their social quarantining. There's one, there's another. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. That person's definitely going to maintain 6-foot distance before they get on the subway. That poor dog. This guy's really innovative. He poked a little hole in his mask so that he could still smoke. It's kind of counterproductive. That was a good one. It's a full body bag. Well, and then I was always taught we're not supposed to put plastic bags over our heads, but somehow this person is still breathing. That looks like it's wrapped right there around the neck too. And then you may have all seen this one. This one got around pretty virally. You can quarantine your head with a, what is that, like a 3-gallon water bottle. And of course, you've heard about herd immunity. So this silence is deafening, by the way. I know I've got a bunch of people on this call here, and like I'm getting zero feedback from you all. So I don't know if this is funny or I'm just totally bombing. I have no idea right now.
50-50, Carlos.
Yeah. You know what would help is if I could seal your faces more. But anyway, I really wouldn't mind if you all, well, you guys want to unmute yourselves and anytime and just shout in. I'm perfectly happy with that because that's how I'm used to presenting. So, the current state of healthcare today. What you're having for you is leading causes of death in the U.S. annually. This was compiled in 2017. As it's always the case, and it's been this case since the 1950s at least, when this really started getting compiled, heart disease is always #1. And that number does not go down, it continues to go up. Despite all the advances in surgeries and pharmaceuticals, that number continues to rise. That's a huge number, folks. That's more than 10 times the number of influenza viruses that we see and deaths to the influenza. Cancers of all types, I'm sure, are as devastating as they are still not as bad as heart disease related fatalities. Accidents, of course, a big chunk of the mortality rates in the US. If there could be any good coming from all of the social quarantining and social isolation, is that people are driving less, so we're losing fewer people to road fatalities every day. There are some upsides. Scrolling down, if you will, just looking down to the third from the bottom, influenza and pneumonia. Just right here, I'm going to let you know that what we attribute to flu deaths every year, just flu now, forget COVID for just a moment, let's take ourselves back to what we typically experience every flu season. I just want you to understand where they come up with that number. And this is well known and established, but it should be understood that anyone who passes in a hospital from what's called nosocomial or hospital-acquired pneumonia is thrown into the category of having died from the flu. It's very interesting to note that because those flu statistics can really be overinflated themselves when one considers the number of mortality in the hospital. I mean, in a hospital is the worst place for you to convalesce. You really should be, using the hospital as a place to, get patched up and get out as quick as possible because your risk of catching other infections and dying goes up significantly the longer you were in there. And so there is an issue when it comes to the data collection of just the flu itself. So if we really looked at true flu deaths for people who are not in the hospital and just walking around every day, that number would significantly drop. And I'm concerned that a lot of the COVID-19 fatalities are experiencing the same type of padding of the numbers. And I'm just going to put that out there to you all. I realize this is a very polarizing subject, and I don't mean to stress anybody out about it, but numbers are numbers. They don't lie. I understand that, but sometimes you need to consider the full picture and the source of the numbers. So I'm going to leave it there. One more thing. I like to mention earlier about the cure being worse than the disease. obviously the economic outcomes of what's going on right now are significant, but there is also a significant uptick in domestic violence and other kinds of problems as a result of all this quarantining. And so again, there are concerns that we need to get through this as quick as possible and quote, get back to normal. So let's discuss a little bit. And if we could, Bo, is it possible to unmute everyone at the same time? Or if you'd like to unmute yourself, I would like to hear from all of you as to what your definition of health is. Can anyone just feel free to chime in here on that?
Yes, I'll unmute everybody. Just please, if you're not speaking, mute yourself, because we end up getting sounds, a fan, a cat, a dog, children, and it gets hard to listen. So I'll unmute everybody, but please pay attention to your mute button and mute yourself if you are not speaking.
Anybody who would like, just throw it out there. What do you consider your definition of what health is? You know, like
balance.
Those words.
Your mental, emotional well-being.
So that's wellness. Benissimo, Anna. She's a colleague of mine.
It's a combination of not only physical well-being, but mental well-being.
Emotional.
Okay. These are very holistic definitions. Anything else, please?
I don't like this word. No.
Go ahead, Joe.
I don't like using the word health at all, or healthy, because usually when people there's no definition really. There's nothing specific with it. It's just I don't ever use it at all. I've been doing so many different diets where people are like, well, that's not healthy, where this isn't healthy. I'm like, okay. Or they'd say, just eat healthy. I'm like, what does that mean? Do you even know what that word means? Because I don't even use it. So it's
very broad.
Yeah.
I would say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, that's all I was gonna say.
I was gonna say, health to me is a state, whether it be good or bad. It's a condition in which the body is in.
Nice. These are very broad-reaching and holistic answers. I'm surprised no one has said the absence of disease. That's often what we in the West consider health, is the absence of disease. Was anyone considering that? Kathy, would you like to say something? I see a hand was raised. It's okay. Maybe she's muted.
Fire.
Oh.
I think the body thrives if left on its own.
Right. Good.
You can.
It certainly will, especially given the right nurturing, and that's what we're going to get to here. That's what we're going to get to. Well, I'll move on from that, and if there's any point you would like to share some more what your thoughts are on what health is, let's discuss. But really, what we'll find out here is that the state of healthcare today really is in the prevention of disease. I should say the absence of disease is considered health, but it really needs to become a lot more than that, and in a proactive way is what we're going to discuss this evening. So here's something to just look at. Here's an example of the medical versus the wellness paradigm. Just take a look at this for a moment and digest the left and right halves of this continuum. And we see on the left, it's very symptom-based and it's very treatment-based. Whereas on the right, it is much more in line with what you all here actually this evening have already put forward. It's a much larger state of thriving, not simply just not being sick, right? You're all familiar with the RDAs of different vitamins and minerals. If you've ever taken a vitamin or you look on the label of a package, you'll see that there's a certain percentage of the recommended daily allowance of X or Y vitamin or mineral. That RDA is considered those numbers are determined by the amount necessary to prevent disease from happening. So for instance, vitamin C, your RDA is 60 milligrams. The reason they come up with 60 milligrams because the average person weighing, say, 50 pounds as a, because we, male, female, right? So just you put that in the middle. 60 milligrams of vitamin C is just enough to prevent scurvy, which is a weakening of the bones, a significant weakening of the bones. Well, do we want to just have enough vitamin C in our diets and in our supplementation just to prevent a severe bone disorder? And the answer, of course, would be no. We want to be much healthier than that. So we don't want to just live to the minimum every day. It's like, I'm going to do the minimum I can today just to make sure I don't get sick, rather than really want to be healthy. And that's a choice we have to all make. So that's why this particular continuum, this diagram is really, I think, descriptive of the bigger picture. And so when I talk to my patients, what I'm ultimately explaining to them is that we all exist somewhere along this continuum. If you look at disease on the left and wellness on the right, we're all somewhere along this continuum. It's just a matter of which direction we're going. What concerns me about medicine today is that it has us going too much to the left and into the place of toward disease. And if you're really not moving toward wellness, then you have to be moving toward disease. It just is the way it happens. So when did this shifting perspective occur? I'm really interested in history. We as Freemasons, we fascinate ourselves with history, and we base a lot of our principles in history. And I think in order to know where we're going, we need to know where we come from. So looking at the traditional cultures is really helpful, not just today, but where these cultures were hundreds and thousands of years ago, specifically in the East, the Far East, India and China, and then also in the West, in Europe. These were, of course, our forefathers, where they came from. And then here in the US as well. Let's take a little journey through this path. So Ayurveda has its roots dating back, dare I say, 5000 BC. The ancient Vedic text, the Atharva Veda, does date to about 7,000 years ago. The writings are still available, and they've done an excellent job at preserving their writings. And what's really amazing about the Eastern cultures is they don't throw things away just because they're old. Same thing in China, as we'll find out. The use of traditional remedies and dietary practices remains till today from thousands of years ago because they worked. And why would you change something that was successful before? And I agree. Physiologically, we're the same Homo sapiens as we were a couple 100,000 years ago. Sure, our brains have changed a little bit, but our bodies, our physiology have not. And what we're looking at in front of us here are the three major body or being types of the Ayurvedic framework. Ayurveda, by the way, literally means the science of living in harmony with one's environment. Ayur literally means life in both Sanskrit and Hindi, and Veda is a study or science. And this came from a time when we saw ourselves not separate from nature. We were part of nature, and why would we do anything that would separate us from nature, from God, essentially? And what we're looking at here in the other three, what are called doshas, or imbalances that we look to avoid. And ultimately, we like to, in Ayurveda, achieve what's called tridoshic or even balance amongst all three of these. And these are three combinations of the five elements of earth, air, fire, water, and ether or space. I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot more that can be looked into regarding Ayurveda, but just understand that based on the five elements, these are the three main divisions of health. And one is living within nature's and God's principles, then they are in a state of what we were calling optimal health and wellness. And as far exceeds just diet, it is a way of living every day. The thoughts we think, the way we breathe, the way we meditate, the type of yoga we practice. And this is a fluid, evolving practice depending on the time of year, the time of day, the time of month. they're in the time of one's life. These are all things that continue to evolve. It's the beauty of this science. From these texts came the 10 base universal principles of ethics, both personal and universal. And they were called the yamas and niyamas. What's really interesting, without breaking these down today, is that the yamas and niyamas matched and mirrored the 10 commandments of the Old Testament quite closely, and they happen to be 10. So I think that's very interesting. In traditional Chinese medicine, around the same time, same age, we've got the view of us and the body as we would a garden that we were looking to till. And when we have the proper pH in the soil and the proper nutrients in the soil, then we see what we have in front of us. We see a well-organized garden, and the crops or plants that we're trying to grow are going to thrive in that nutrient-rich soil with proper sunlight, air and water. However, when the pH is off and the nutrients are off, then we know what often happens. Not only do our intended plants die, but we have unintended pests and other plants, weeds that grow. And the way we approach this today, of course, is unfortunately a little bit different. If we look at the garden of today being the body, what we do is we throw Roundup at it and other types of pesticides and herbicides to kill those things that we don't want and just grow the things that we do want. And we're doing the same thing to our bodies with our scientific approach today. The concept of good and evil is something that the Chinese system really struggled with and dealt with. Of course, we have the black and white in our Freemason history as well, but everyone's familiar at the same time with this yin and yang symbol right here. And the take home for this symbol is to show that the flowing of the dark and the light is not an absolute 50-50, but instead it's an ever flowing like water, one into the other, just like the time of day. Like right now, we're obviously into the evening hours. So this would be much on the darker side. But take a notice here, you may not have looked at this way before, that we have a small amount of each in the dominant portion of the other, small amount of the black or the dark in the light, and a small amount of the light in the dark. And this really does reflect quite well in the Chinese medicine principles of, Kathy, that's a really funny background. You had the same, you had the same problem I did. You get more light on that. I just got sidetracked by that one.
There you go.
So that is the ultimate, and the principles of Chinese medicine are really based on the fact that there is no absolute, and that everything is always ever flowing, and you have to treat your health, and we as practitioners need to treat our patients just like that. And so therefore, no treatment is ever fixed. It's always open to modification depending on what's going on with the person at that time. The acupuncture meridians themselves, they date back to the Yellow Emperor's Classic around 2nd century BC during the Han Dynasty. And this is just a map, and a typical map we might use as practitioners to find the different points on the body. These are the meridians. Meridians, in fact, though, were found tattooed on a European man. This was found in 1999, somewhere between Austria and Italy. It was really fascinating, but this man, who was about 5,000 years old, was shown to, he tattooed on his body these same meridians, lines. And it would suggest perhaps that there was already this same knowledge in the West, or maybe there was a really a much older link from east to west of trade and customs, and in this case science and medical practices than we realize. It's really interesting when you look at that. I have links and sources for everything that I'm showing you, just about every slide, except those funny pictures in the beginning. I didn't give those proper whatchamacallit. So let's look, I'm going pretty fast here, but let's move away from the East for just a moment and look toward our, again, American European roots and start with Hippocrates. So 5th century BC, everyone knows Hippocrates was the founder of modern medicine. His basic tenets were healthy mind, healthy body, health promotion through exercise and nutrition. That was number one. Trauma care was very important because it was a very warring time, as it always has been, right? And so physicians had to be well-versed in surgical practices, and they really were. And then mental care and wellness, music and dramatic arts as therapy. This was not something that was taken lightly. This was a very important part of the Greek society, and was very much part of their history and roots going back to the Assyrians and Egyptians and going forward to the Romans and throughout, you know, much of European history. And that's not to be taken lightly, because without the arts, a person was not considered to be properly balanced here. And if we look to the roots of alchemy and medicine, I wrote a lot here, but I'm going to move through this quite quickly. We know that alchemy ultimately was considered a fringe part of science, but those who, the alchemists, were considered, though, the greatest thinkers, and through those people, many of whom were considered heretics, we've gotten a lot of our medical and scientific breakthroughs to today, so thank God we had them. But the roots of it do date to the Alexandria Library of 300 AD, and as we know, there were a lot of fires in that library and many others that were burned. So it's really sad to think about how much we've actually lost over time. Again, I mentioned the Greeks, Assyrians, and Chinese, and the Hindus, the Indians, the people of India, the Indus Valley. They were excellent record keepers. Unfortunately, many of those texts were lost, but the many that did maintain, they did survive. We have access to them today. So the goal was to transmute metals into gold, but why? The ultimate metal that was really looked at, we think about lead a lot of times, but it really was mercury. Mercury defined a lot of the pharmaceutical and apothecary practices throughout the Dark Ages, the medieval times, and even the Renaissance era. And the first animal experiments on mercury toxicity were reported by Rhazes in the 9th century. That was during the Ottoman Empire. Mercurial distillates were found to be used medicinally throughout up to the 20th century for many topical and internal applications. And many times they did work. You could say, though, mercury and its salts, mercurial salts, were essentially analogous to modern day antibiotics. Paracelsus introduced the uses of primarily mercury and other salts for treatment of syphilis throughout the 15th century. That was a big deal because syphilis was killing a lot of people, as was the bubonic plague. And they were used again for chronic diseases throughout the 18th, 19th centuries, especially as topical antiseptics. Nostradamus, we know of Nostradamus as, of course, the great prophet, and many of his prophecies have upheld to modern day. Very fascinating and uncanny. But very few people know the Nostradamus as the classically trained physician. He was known for having treated using astrology, the occultic arts, herbs, and proper hygiene to treat the bubonic plague, the Black Plague, which killed about, half to 2/3 of Europe at the time. His practices, though, were more successful than those physicians who were just using bloodletting and mercury to treat their patients. He was daring enough to suggest that we move the sick and diseased and dead bodies out of the street and move them outside the city so that disease did not get spread. He was practicing proper hygiene at the time. And unfortunately, he was pushed off his fringe, especially because of his interest in the occult and in astrology for using it for medical purposes. And then it was only after him being exiled from France, he had to go to other parts of Europe in order, it was when he had his psychic epiphanies, and then he started going through his prophetic times of his life. That was really the latter third of his life after the death of his wife and children from the bubonic plague. It was like that tragedy sort of sparked in him this next level of his understanding of death and life. Descartes, you may be familiar with his his tenet of I think, therefore I am, and the mind body, I put this in there because there really is a mind body disconnection. If we ever really did see a beginning of modern medicine, it really happened during the revelations of this particular French philosopher, because prior to that, we really did have a much more holistic model of the mind and the body being one. When I look back at I think back to the Ayurvedic and the Chinese principles, for instance, and we're looking at, say, anxiety, and my training as an acupuncturist, a Chinese medical physician as well, we would never look at anxiety as something that's just in the brain. Sure, it's manifesting up here behaviorally, but anxiety actually is something that's affecting the heart meridian. The heart meridian, the heart is where we carry anxiety. Or depression, pardon? Depression, for instance, is somewhere, we refer to it as anger turned inward, and that's targeted by the liver and the liver meridian. So we see organ imbalances in the holistic model, not just behavioral manifestations of these imbalances. And really it's with Descartes that it seemed to have started this sort of separation from mind and body. I had something else I wanted to say about that, but I'm going to leave it there right now. I'm moving forward in European history. This was a very important person in the progression of medicine as we see it today. His name was a German physician named Samuel Hahnemann. He lived in the mid 17 and 1800s, and he really was the modern day founder of energy medicine, the medicine specifically called homeopathy. If you've heard of it, it's based on a series of dilutions, so many dilutions of original toxic substances such as mercury, which was the first thing he proved. And to the point where the dilutions of the original substance are completely wiped out. So when one would look at, say, diluted mercury or arsenic or strychnine under a microscope or any other type of biochemical assay, we would see that there is no trace of the original substance in there. But why do these remedies, dating now 300 years later, still work? Why do they work? And the big assumption that we learn, and again, in the homeopathic holistic model, is that through these series of dilutions, we are actually changing the vibration of water. And in changing that vibration of water, we create an actual healing remedy. That's the fascinating thing. Why did he come up with this? Well, Hahnemann his wife was dying of some chronic illness, and his classical medical training was not coming up with the answers that he needed. So he went back into the books, the alchemical books, and he was looking at Hermes, the work of Hermes and Paracelsus, and he was looking at ancient Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine. And somewhere along the way, he came up with these theories about progressive dilutions of originally toxic substances, and then giving them to patients. And sure enough, she was well. And he started doing it, and it became the dominant force of the medicine that he was practicing, and it's still practiced today. So much so that at the founding of our nation here, homeopathic medicine was as on equal grounds with what we know today as allopathic medicine. In fact, Hahnemann Hospital still exists today in Philadelphia and is part of the Drexel University School of Medicine, and it's right there, as I said, in Philadelphia. And that was founded in 1848. So prior to the Civil War and during the Civil War time, homeopathic medicine was considered just as equally important as conventional medicine, backed by the AMA at this time. And I'm going to go over with you in just a couple slides as to where that division really started, so that gap really started to widen, if you'll just indulge me here in a moment. And by the way, homeopathy is still considered a dominant form of medicine throughout Northern Europe, Germany, and France. And we are still legally allowed to practice it here. I say still because there are a number of agencies that are threatened by the practice of homeopathy, saying that it's an invalid form of medicine. And it's really unfortunate, because we should have the choice. Because it's never hurt anybody. It's not hurting anybody. Why not leave it alone? Ignaz Semmelweis was a Hungarian physician who in the mid-1800s dared to suggest that physicians wash their hands prior to delivering babies. He washed his hands. He used chlorinated water. He was the first one to ever do that, 1846. his ideas at that time were considered so fringe and so heretical that he was fired from his position as a staff on staff at Vienna Hospital. That was a major hospital in Vienna. And he was an outcast and ultimately committed to an insane asylum where he was beaten and he died of his injuries. Imagine that. I bring this up because it just shows you that what we consider today, we would never think of not washing our hands before a surgical procedure, was one time considered, and not long ago. How long ago was that? 150, 160, 70 years. He was basically discredited by everybody. I just love history. Everybody's heard of Pasteur, the founder of pasteurization and also antibiotics, modern day antibiotics. Well, he had a contemporary named Claude Bernard, and the two were very good friends. They were physiologists and microbiologists, and they were both at odds as to ultimately, sorry, that's Sophie shaking her collar. So they were both at odds as to ultimately the cause of disease. Well, of course, we know that Pasteur is the founder of the modern day germ theory. You know, he was this guy saying that these are the guys that cause disease. However, Bernard said no, that it's the internal environment, terrain, or the milieu of the body, like we were talking about earlier, or the garden, right, that determines whether the organism gets sick or not. And purportedly on his deathbed, and this is from multiple sources, that Pasteur said that Bernard is right. He said this in French, but obviously the microbe here is nothing. That instead, the environment is everything. Now, could Pasteur's theory have been upheld for purposes of profit over general welfare? And there are many who suggest that that is the case. Not to suggest that antibiotics did not revolutionize medicine and that we haven't saved hundreds of millions of lives worldwide with antibiotics. But the question one must ask is, have we gone a little bit overboard with the use of antibiotics? By the way, the pasteurization of honey and juices and milk ultimately came from this same assumption that microbes cause disease. And we have to consider, again, is the cure worse than the disease? The Amish, for instance, still practice and by law are able to, among their community, consume raw dairy, raw honey, raw cheese, raw juices, and fortunately for them, they've been able to retain those practices. However, what we're consuming is largely considered dead food because when we pasteurize something, we heat treat the food to the point where many of the nutrients and the enzymes are gone. They're completely destroyed. If you've heard of lactose intolerance, well, there's the main reason we have lactose intolerance in our culture. Lactose is a sugar lactase is an enzyme that is needed to break down the sugar of lactose in milk. When you destroy, with heat, you destroy enzymes. And so you break that lactose down, you kill it, destroy it, I should say. That lactase is missing in the cheese, in that dairy. And so you're consuming now lactase deficient dairy products, and we experience a lot of times dairy sensitivities. And that's an example of. Now you might say, well, okay, wouldn't I get sick if I consume unpasteurized milk, cheese, juices and honey? And I have to say, if we consume them from the local source, rather than having them shipped from thousands of miles away, there's a good chance we probably would develop the internal microbiotic environment to be able to tolerate these things, and we'd actually be much healthier as a culture. So where did the big split off really happen from the holistic to the reductionist model of medicine where we're at today? And it all goes back to 1910, and Abraham Flexner was commissioned by Johns Hopkins University and a big think tank funded by the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and the Rothschilds, actually. This individual was a brilliant scientist out of Tufts University. He was inspired by the German medical model in education, and he was asked to create a curriculum by which medical schools and medical curricula could be standardized, so we can have basically the club be created so that, okay, here's going to be the minimum necessary for someone to call themselves a physician. And ultimately, it was, you know, sold to the public as a way to protect ourselves, so that we can weed out the quacks and get the ones who are, you know, selling snake oil to the public, push them out to the fringes, and ultimately, you know, make their practices illegal. And this is exactly what this report did. Anybody who did not get accepted into the club was excommunicated out, and you could not call yourself a physician for a long time. Osteopathic physicians ended up joining the MDs. The DOs today are on exact par with them, but at the time of this split off, the DOs had to make a choice. What happened with the chiropractors, who were also much like the DOs and taking the osteopathic or spinal and musculoskeletal approach to health and disease, they maintained their ability to remain as physicians, but they lost the ability, or they never really developed the ability to do surgeries or prescribe drugs. So technically, the chiropractors were the real purists. But the osteopaths went the way of the allopathic doctors, so that they did not lose their identity. They gave up their identity in order to join the allopathic model. Today, a DO can be a heart surgeon, a brain surgeon, a plastic surgeon, and they are exactly on par with the MDs. But that's happened over 100 years ago, 110 years ago. And this really was a pivotal moment in the future of the healthcare climate as it stands today, was that Flexner report. Challenges facing us today in the West. We have a compartmentalized treatment-based system, as you can deduce from what we've been speaking about. The blurred line between health insurance and health care is something that's a huge political and socioeconomic topic today. We have oftentimes reduced access to desired care. What do I mean by that? Well, I can't tell you how many times I have patients tell me that they didn't get the tests run that they wanted because their insurance wouldn't cover it, whether it be Medicare, Medicaid, or just their private carrier. Huge political football, vaccinations. I could do a whole other presentation just on this alone. I'm not going to touch on this too much tonight, but it's a huge divide amongst people. It's an extremely passionate topic. And I lie somewhere in the middle, just so you know. I'm going to leave it right there. Just understand, though, as you can imagine, the vaccination movement today and where it is very different than where it was just back in the 80s and earlier. And this is where a lot of the issues of contention really come up. Since the 90s and forward, people like RFK Jr., Upper F. Kennedy Jr., an attorney, have really become outspoken against the modern day practices in the vaccination world. And many of us, and I'm in the same camp, what we're concerned about is that the vaccine schedules have become so much more aggressive than they were when I was a kid back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And what we're giving to our kids now is a lot more aggressive. And the other issue is the mercury content is much higher in these vaccines than they were. So we have two issues, really. And the third issue is we're just vaccinating against a lot more things than we used to be vaccinated against. We stopped smallpox in '72, we stopped polio, but what we're vaccinating against today are a lot of people would consider to be non-life-threatening, illnesses. And we got to again go back to the question and ultimately answer ourselves: is the cure worse than the disease? I'll leave it there. Maybe we can open it up later for discussion. GMO foods. So we're looking now into agriculture here. Okay, we're going to morph a little bit into agriculture and away from just healthcare. Genetically modified foods, again, started in the 90s. The prototypical crop was corn and then soy. Bill Gates was big money behind this, as he is today with the vaccine movement. And maybe he was well-intentioned or not, but ultimately the assumption with GMO, genetically modified foods, is to provide more food for the starving nation, the starving people, the third and fourth world people. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but 30 years later, I don't see people being any better fed than they were 30 years ago when at the start of this movement. And if we just go back about 5 years earlier than that, I don't have it up here, but we started giving cows bovine growth hormone. in around 1987, 1988 was when I first started experimenting with it. It was there with the European Union, before they were really formed, the European Union said, no, we're not doing that. And they never gave their animals, their livestock, these growth inducers, nor the degree of antibiotics that we feed our animals today. And they certainly don't feed their animals or their citizens genetically modified foods. In fact, you cannot get those foods over there. Prime example is high fructose corn syrup made from a genetically modified corn is not to be found anywhere in South America or Europe or Asia. They just will not import our GMO-laden products. I find that very interesting. The degree of waste and excessive chemical exposure to our livestock and the byproducts and waste from these factory farming practices cannot be overlooked. It's very significant. My eyes were opened to this by a book written in 1989 or 90, John Robbins, an heir of the Baskin-Robbins chain of all people. He exposed the insides of the ills of factory farming industry way back in 30 years ago. And that was a big eye-opener for me. This is when I really started on my path to plant-based diet and really looking at the bigger picture of not just nutrition and healthcare, but farming practices, agriculture. At the bottom, high fructose corn syrup and trans fats are some of the other items of contention that would really come out of this entire big pharma, big agriculture movement today. And I'm happy to speak about those later if you have questions. We're winding down here, folks. I'm just want to give you an idea where we're at. Why am I? Oh, my screen froze. Wait. Okay, I'm back. So what can we do? First of all, we need to be proactive. We should be proactive. Develop a working relationship with your doctor. What do I mean by that? Challenge your doctor. Don't just go once a year and get, I mean, most people, frankly, don't even go and get checkups. You know, we'll say, oh, something I'll do later, you know, when I'm older. But, you know, a yearly annual checkup is the very bare minimum that someone should consider, because disease can often be felt. It's something that's, you know, it's like the slow boiling of the frog. It's something that happens to us very slowly over time. And this is what concerns me about people who are close to me in my life. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that knowledge and information are key, but you have to put those into practice. And the best way to do that is to be educated. And the best way to educate yourself, of course, is inquire and push your doctor. And if your doctor is not the person to do that, then find a better doctor who's going to sit with you and really have frank discussions about your health. Make it about you. This is not somebody who you spend, you know, 5 minutes with. Three of those minutes would be with a PA or a nurse, so that you can just get your, you know, your labs ordered and your medications filled, and then you're gone until next year. Those days are over. We cannot continue to do that, because frankly, it's the major cause of why we have that big list I showed you in the beginning of largely preventable diseases. Make your health your priority. Don't be limited by your medical coverage. It's easy to say that, but if your medical care does not provide for holistic measures, maybe consider getting a health savings account where you can write off expenses such as acupuncture and chiropractic and naturopathic medicine, physical therapy, I mean, exercise prescriptions. These are things that you may often have to go out of pocket for, but maybe can still get reimbursed through your taxes. Ask questions, very important. And then really, functional medicine and functional lab assessments are really where we should be in healthcare, and we're not there. What I mean by that is you can look at lab work and see if somebody's just in range or out of range, and you can go in feeling really bad. So, you know, you're not sleeping right, you're depressed, you're gaining weight significantly every year, and your lab work comes back normal. Your doctor's like, nothing I can do for you. I can write you for an antidepressant though, or a sleep aid. And you're like, I just don't want any more drugs, doc. I want some answers. That's where a functional medicine specialist can really help you. And that's something that fits that model that we were talking about earlier, the traditional model, and moves much more to the right side of that spectrum, that continuum and the left side, which again is, we're not just trying to prevent disease from happening. We're trying to be optimally well, as far away from that left side of the spectrum as possible. So start with your terrain, the garden, the milieu, as Bertrand would say. Cut out the health detractors. I'm happy to leave that open to discussion, but the health detractors are something that we take for granted because they don't kill us right away. It doesn't mean that they're not bad for us. The smoking, the drinking, the bad foods, the bad thoughts, the stress, the health practices. There are so many that I can go on and on about. We need to first minimize and eliminate those out of our lives. And sometimes it takes education, and that's where, again, you need to be leaning on your healthcare provider, your health coach, your nutritionist, to really be guiding you and motivating you to do that. Boost up with superfoods. You don't need to spend money on expensive vitamins when there are so many healthy superfoods that you can be consuming. And you should think about them every day, because the best medicine is food, number one. Taking away the bad stuff and putting in the good stuff.
Carlos, what are some of those superfoods? It's funny you say that, because I was just thinking, I don't know what most of the superfoods are.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those. So I have my long list that I like to use. So the super greens, the super blue-green algae, spirulina, chlorella, these are foods in powdered form that you can pick up through a variety of brands. Amazon, very good way to get competitively priced stuff. There are a number of the ginseng family of roots that are excellent, such as Siberian and American ginseng, Korean and Chinese ginsengs. A South American ginseng is known as maca root. An Indian from East India ginseng is known as ashwagandha. The term ginseng is used loosely. This is not necessarily a species name or a genus name, but more so as a general family name of these to show that they have a similar effect on the body in boosting vitality. I'm happy to provide a list of these for you. They would have been in my slides if I didn't have the whole screen up. They'd be on my bottom part of my screen, but I don't know, I don't want to mess things up right now. I could look at it there. Shoot. There we go. Take a look here. If anyone has ever heard of some of the fermented foods like kombucha and kimchi, depending on the culture that you're from, sauerkraut, these are all things that help to build the gut microbiome in a very healthy way. You've heard of probiotics. Well, these are actually food probiotics. The berries, the darker the color, the better. Blueberries, blackberries, pomegranate are some really good ones that they're super high in antioxidants. So what antioxidants do is they scavenge up the nasties in the body, the free radicals that go around causing destruction to our DNA, our telomeres, which I actually have a slide on in just a moment. I just want to take a moment and talk about stress. I will talk more about the superfoods, but that's just some of them. Cortisol is an immune suppressant, so much so that we actually have a pharmaceutical grade cortisone known as prednisone. If you ever been to the emergency room and had severe skin rash, hives, asthma, for instance, you would have been given a course of prednisone, some other brand names known as Medrol. And they told you, of course, if you're going to take this, you have to stair-step it down. You can't just stop it cold turkey. Prednisone is a synthetic version of what the body already produces through the adrenal glands called cortisol. Cortisol is a survival-based hormone, and it's secreted during times of extreme stress. It's also secreted during fasting, which we fast every day, hopefully, when we're sleeping 8 to 10 hours. We're going without food. And cortisol is secreted in order to keep the blood sugar from dropping to the point where we go into a coma. So fortunately, we do have the proper amount of cortisol that's necessary circulating the bloodstream. However, when we have uncontrolled stress in our lives and we don't have, say, a prayer or a spiritual or meditative type practice, cortisol can run rampant. Now, I'm looking at my time, doing great. 8 o'clock exactly. So cortisol will run rampant and it can really do damage to the body. It will affect the brain. It actually could cause brain shrinkage. It can cause destruction of every system of the body, any system of the body. It will eat a hole in your stomach. It will destroy your bones, because that's what cortisol does, is it breaks down tissue, just like prednisone does. Chronic use of prednisone is not unheard of in people with, say, ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, disorders of the intestine, where they just will be on prednisone for decades. And it's a very destructive drug. And unfortunately, when you don't know what else to give in pharmaceutical practice, you just keep giving prednisone. Just so you know, cortisol does the same thing as the drug prednisone when you don't learn to control it. Cortisol has also been known to cause the increase in belly fat. So people who say, I'm dieting and exercising, yet I'm not controlling my weight. And next question I ask is, well, how are you sleeping? What do you do for your stress management? What is the level of stress in your life? And until we get that under control, you're not going to get your cortisol balance. And there's actually a very effective way to measure cortisol through saliva testing, which I've been doing for 20 some years now in my patients, because until you figure out the individual's cortisol curve, you really can't help them with chronic illness. Supplements. Coronavirus notwithstanding, we should be taking antioxidants on a daily basis. I'll just give you these two right away, these two gems. You should be taking vitamin C and zinc every day. Both very well peer-reviewed as known antivirals. I don't know why we're not talking about these in the media. They're so simple, they're so inexpensive. They are very broad spectrum antivirals. They're not the only ones, but they are very effective. There are more than 50,000 scholarly articles written on vitamin C since Linus Pauling's work in the 1940s and 50s. Brilliant physician was showing that we can treat so many diseases with vitamin C. Not 60 milligrams just to prevent scurvy. We're talking hundreds and thousands of milligram doses. And we can take care of a lot of problems with that. Nostradamus was giving people lozenges of hibiscus flower. He would compress them, and we know that hibiscus is a great source of vitamin C today. Of course, he didn't know that back then.
Carlos, I have a question.
Yes, please.
About your vitamin C.
Yes.
How much would you say we should be taking per day?
Great question, Worshipful. So minimum of 1,000 to 3,000 milligrams every day. That's 1 to 3 grams. If you have active disease, so you're sick, so you have coronavirus, it wouldn't be unheard of for you to take upwards of 10,000 plus and in divided doses throughout the day.
Yeah, but don't you urinate? Don't you urinate all that out, like, and you're not really getting a benefit?
It is a water-soluble vitamin. However, that's why you spread it out, okay? Because yes, you're going to get tissue saturation, but that's what you want. You want to get to the point where you're going to lose some in the urine. But over the course of, say, a 12-hour period in a day, it would behoove you to spread those 10,000 out. So say you take 1,000 every hour or two, right? And you'll get your requisite amount. I should tell you, though, if you're going to take that much vitamin C, you really do want a buffered form, because ascorbic acid is very much that. It's an acid. And that's the primary form that vitamin C comes in. So it should be buffered to, say, calcium or magnesium. And it would say so on the label. You might pay a little more for it. And if you don't want to spend the money on a buffered form, what you can do is take a little baking soda and put a little baking soda in the water that you're shooting down the vitamin C with. That'll buffer the acidity. It's not a bad idea to do that. Sorry?
Well, how much is zinc?
Zinc is something that you would want to take, again, depending on if you have active disease or not. A minimum you'd want to consider every day is 25 milligrams as a woman and at least 50 to 100 as a man. We use a lot more because zinc is required for testosterone metabolism and delivery to the cells. So men can tolerate a lot more than women. In fact, zinc has a lot further reaching, as does vitamin C, benefits. I'm just talking with the context of the immune system. Anna, it's a great question, but you should be taking at least 25 milligrams a day. A typical zinc lozenge that you would take for, say, just a sore throat or something is not going to contain more than 5 milligrams. So it's really negligible. I will tell you, though, be careful with zinc to not take on an empty stomach. Many people cannot tolerate zinc on an empty stomach. Some can, but if you take zinc on an empty stomach, especially 50 or 100 milligrams, you're going to really be sorry because you're just going to feel like someone punched you in the stomach really hard.
Well,
it's
people
gonna hurt.
depleted of zinc when they're eating, when they're vegetarian or vegan, there is less zinc in their diet.
Oh yes, thank you, Anna. So yes, so people who have a strict plant-based diet may not get as much zinc because zinc is found a lot in shellfish, but it's also found in wheat kernel, wheat germ. It's very high in that. So if you consume whole grain rice or wheat or the other grains, you're going to be less likely to have zinc deficiency. Zinc's very important though for male virility and drive and everything else too. It's very inexpensive. It doesn't matter what brand you get.
Thank you.
Yeah. So vitamin A is also a very powerful antioxidant. What's a great source of vitamin A? We know it's carrots and beta carotene, and it's a very good way to get a good amount of zinc. I'm sorry, vitamin A. Vitamin D is super important. You cannot get enough for sunlight, not even in Arizona, especially with all the sunscreen we've been putting on our skin. And we need a lot of vitamin D. The minimum that we should be taking every day is about 3,000 to 5,000 IUs or international units of vitamin D every day. You're not getting enough in your sun. And you should be pushing your doctor to measure your vitamin D and your blood test. And if your vitamin D is lower than 50, you are too low. The range really is minimum of 30 in a standard blood test. I'm telling you, 30 is too low. It's like below 30, you are a significant increase in risk of chronic disease. So vitamin D is also a very powerful immune booster. Low vitamin D levels have been associated with colon cancers and many other types of cancers and digestive disorders, hormone disorders. In fact, vitamin D itself is a pro-hormone. So we need vitamin D to make our hormones. Incidentally, do you know what kind of molecule cholesterol is? People think it's a fat, and it's not. It's actually a hormone. Because cholesterol is the major master hormone of the body. It's the first hormone produced by the liver, from which we make all our other hormones. So if you're on a cholesterol-blocking drug, such as atorvastatin or Lipitor, you're blocking your most important hormone of your body. I would definitely consult with your doctor on that one and really find out if you need to be on that drug. There's a very small percentage of the population that I think should be on that drug. And the people with familial hypercholesterolemia, the people who have like genetic like 400 plus, might consider a benefit from that only if they've exhausted all other possibilities. I'm happy to talk about cholesterol later if someone has interest. Let me talk about turmeric because that's been one of the other superfoods that everybody should be doing every day. Turmeric is known as Indian gold. All the beautiful orange garments that we see and artwork we see coming out of India is because they use turmeric as the primary dye. And it is so valuable in India that without it, their culture would not have thrived to the point where it is today. It is the most, and probably the most significant of all the root herbs on the planet. If you take enough turmeric every day, which I can't give you a milligram amount, but if you get the active form of turmeric known as curcumin at about 200 milligram doses, C-U-R-C-U-M-I-N, you are getting a very concentrated and active form of turmeric usually in a capsule form. I have been using in my patients, and I love very much, a nanoparticle size curcumin that's not expensive. You can pick it up on Amazon for about $15, and you take a couple of capsules that a day. And the reason for the nanoparticle size is that turmeric becomes a lot more absorbable, especially to the brain. That can get across the blood-brain barrier, and it's been shown to break up the tangles and the plaques that cause Alzheimer's and dementia. That's the nanoparticle size curcumin. If you get hold of that and you want something that's going to boost your brain function, check that one out.
Dr. Santos.
Yes, Carlos, please. It's okay.
Yeah. Turmeric is the one herb that my liver doctor has told me not to take because it interferes with my anti-rejection drugs from my liver transplant.
Ah, interesting. I would, Kathy, would be happy to talk to you about it after. I'm not familiar with that, but thank you for letting me know. I wonder if there might be a workaround with that one, though, especially with the nanoparticle size.
I would hope so, because I like the properties of it, and I do cook with it, but I very sparingly cook with it.
I see. Interestingly, turmeric is one of the most powerful anti-inflammatories on the planet. It is a COX-2 inhibitor, much like ibuprofen. It works incredibly well for pain on the acute as well as the chronic level. So you have an injury, you can take it. If you have arthritis, you can take it. You have, all kinds of aches and pains, you can take turmeric, and you cannot take too much unless maybe you are experiencing or concerned about, some type of rejection. So I could do an entire discourse just on this herb alone and cover every system of the body. It benefits the heart, the brain, the respiratory system, the mind. It's been shown to help reduce anxiety and depression. So if you can, I buy turmeric by the kilo, and I buy it and I use it. So I get it in bulk on Amazon, and I just use it every day in my drinks that I mix up. It's awesome, and that's in addition to the nano size that I take in capsule form. I
Sounds
attribute
like something I want for my husband, though.
Yeah,
Sure.
everyone should take it. No one can hurt. No one can not benefit from it. It will lower it, and this is documented, peer reviewed. It'll lower cholesterol. It'll help with weight loss, and it'll help boost immunity and mood. I mean, what more can you want from a superfood? That is the superfood. Matcha. Anyone heard of matcha? It's the green tea extract, powdered form. It's really good, and it's super high in polyphenols, antioxidants. I love it. I use it, and it tastes good. It's Starbucks makes some matcha green tea extra.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah.
I used to work at Starbucks, and there's the green tea latte has the matcha, the frappuccino.
It's quite good. It doesn't have a lot of sugar though. I'm a little concerned about that. But you can make your own. Make your own. Get the matcha on Amazon. I'm a big fan of polyphenols in general. So coffee, black tea varieties, dark chocolate, red grapes. That means grape juice as well as red wine. Who doesn't love red wine? But if you want to stay away from alcohol, and it's not a bad idea to do that, you can just get the same amount from Welch's grape juice. Pomegranate juice is a great source of those polyphenols as well, and the berries we discussed earlier.
Carlos,
please.
When we're looking at supplements, is there anything you would recommend as far as how do we choose a good supplement versus a bad supplement, or the things to look for? Because when I look for them on Amazon, they're so varied, it's hard to tell, and the prices are all over the place. It's hard to tell what a good one is.
Well, it's a matter of being discerning, but this is again where consulting with a holistic provider, a functional medicine specialist can really benefit you, because if you speak to someone like me, we have access to the professional line of supplements. Now, what's happened today with the free market is on Amazon, those same professional lines are on there. And, I can't compete with those prices. So therefore, I don't really sell a whole lot of supplements anymore out of my office, because I just tell people, go buy them on Amazon, cheaper, right? But I can tell you about a couple of excellent product lines that you want to look for. Standard Process, Biotics, and Apex Energetics are three great ones, but they're not the only ones. Those are three good ones that I use on a regular basis.
Would you repeat it?
Sure. On Apex Energetics, they're out of Irvine. Apex, they are phenomenal. Biotics Research out of Houston, and Standard Process out of the Midwest somewhere. Now, as far as herb companies go, the number one herb company I like, if you're looking just at herbs, is Gaia, G-A-I-A. They're out of North Carolina. And Gaia, the reason they're so phenomenal is because they grow absolutely every one of their plants in-house. And then they process them there. And everything is done in-house. I would recommend not getting anything out of China when it comes to anything you're consuming by mouth. Period, end of story. Which is why you have to be concerned with some Chinese herbal remedies. You got to make sure they're not made in China. A good company that does not use Chinese herbal products, but sources through American products and their Chinese herbs, is Health Concerns out of Oakland. I do like Health Concerns Chinese medicine products very much. Another one I like very much is Kan, K-A-N, Kan Herbals. They use primarily liquid preparations for their herbs. So, nice thing about Amazon is you can read reviews, and people, if they'll let you know right away if the thing is counterfeit or, junk, So it's good to speak to a health coach to help make some, discern some of these things, which is again why I say get it through your food versus through supplements, because in the end, real food is your best medicine.
Brother Carlos, can I ask you a question?
Please, yes. Brother
You know, you've heard that little, you know, phrase about you only have so many heartbeats. And I don't mean to be a downer here, but the idea of health is as a status when you are thinking about the future, right? As for some people, there's a status of health as they are in the process of dying. And one of the things that's always fascinated me about the benefit of eating and being mentally active and challenged is when you see a person who is dying, who is still eating well, still engaged mentally, and still thinking about their, you know, physical activity at some level, it depends. They seem to last longer as well. And I've always had this kind of perception that, man, can you cheat death when it's on its way? And we're doing that, you know, you're doing that with this talk completely, you know, right now. But you're not cheating it on the acute level when it's like months away, weeks away. And I'm pushing you a little bit here, I know, as far as what you deal with, but there's some people who are just dying. We've got people who are dying all over the country right now, right? They're dying, you know, from respiratory diseases and complications of. What are some of the things people could do who are in that state with their diet to have, because you say health is the absence of disease. I'm not really on that definition. It's just, I think, as somebody else said, a status at some point. Here's your health. Here's your approach to better health. Here's your approach to worse health. They're all on the, you know, and as you're dying, you're going to the, I don't know if you're going to worse health or it's just another status. But in terms of homeopathic medicine, when you know it's going to happen, how do you perceive health in that state? And address it.
Someone, I'm trying to synthesize what you said there. It's so, I think I might be covering this in my final few slides here. But again, just to be clear, I'm not talking about simply just the absence of disease as defining health. That is, I think, what's gotten us into this place where we are. In fact, that mindset really needs to change if we're going to change the face of healthcare. So the question then is, regardless of where, quote, I am in my life, can I optimize my circumstance regardless of the genetic, you know, deck that I've been dealt? The limited number of heartbeats or respirations, for instance, is more of a fatalist, you know, sort of take on the whole thing. In other words, you know, is it predetermined how long I'm going to live? Maybe, but is it predetermined how well I'm going to live? And the answer is absolutely not, right? I choose that. So free will always comes into play. So I can't tell someone, I guarantee you're going to live longer, but I can guarantee 100% that I can make you live, help you live better with the deck that you've been dealt. Ideally, so just to your latter part of your point, you were talking about the dying process. The ideal way to, you know, to age is to age gracefully, and then when it is your time, is to, you know, is to drop off quickly, and not die over, you know, many years, if not decades, and be a burden to the system, and not to mention your family and the ones closest to you, because there's no fate worse than watching someone die a slow death. I hope I answered that, but I think that no matter where you are, you can optimize what you've got. Let me go through these final couple slides here. Maybe we'll touch on that even more. So where are we headed? Where I hope we're headed. Well, there's this concept called transhumanism, and has it already begun? We're being replaced by robots in a sense, because we got robotic parts for just pretty much anything these days. Anybody here have a titanium knee or joint? Anybody have a pig valve or a mechanical valve in their heart? I mean, we've been doing transhumanism for, you know, well over 100 years. I mean, we've been putting synthetic parts in our bodies for a very long time, and we're going to continue doing that the more the further we go down this road. And of course, it's good. I don't want to go down the whole philosophical part of that. You know, could we be replaced by, you know, machines at some point? I don't know. Could our consciousness be downloaded to a computer chip and then, you know, uploaded to a big device, and then so that our consciousness actually continues after we give up the body? I think that's the direction we're headed, but that's not where I'm going with this talk tonight. But I do submit that at least here, in the context of what we can do proactively, we are already experiencing transhumanism, every one of us. We experience it through genetoplasticity, first of all. Can we actually modify our genes? In further answer to your further addressing of your question, Vic, what can we do with the deck we've been dealt? Well, is it possible that cell aging can be turned around? And we know for sure that it can. You see those red parts at the end of that chromosome right there? That's called telomeres. And telomeres are like the tips of shoelaces. What happens when the tips of the shoelaces start to break apart? What does that shoelace itself do? It gets all frayed. And that happens to the ends of our chromosomes and the ends of our, and ultimately causing a rapid cell death. And so science is now looking at ways to optimize those telomeres and extend the length of those telomeres so that the length of those cells, the life of those cells, is actually restored and optimized. But we also do know right now that things that damage our telomeres are things that we can control, such as stress, smoking, diet, and obesity. I don't think it's any coincidence that the obese portions of our population worldwide are the ones experiencing more mortality from the COVID-19. It's just happening. Bioplasticity is also known as biohacking. There's a lot of cool research in this area, and this is where we start really looking at the nitty-gritty of how to optimize science in our favor. We can do it through hormone optimization, nutraceuticals, much like the high-dose vitamins in both IV and oral form, and the superfoods, again, to optimize our biology. Stem cell therapy, not inexpensive in any way, very expensive. Maybe one day it won't be, but stem cells are the key to regenerating our body's tissues. Hyperbaric oxygen is just another example. Neurofeedback, often used for PTSD, is great. Neurofeedback is amazing. It's great for a lot of behavioral disorders in adults as well as children. Sound healing, the use of binaural beats and other types of healing frequencies. A lot of free stuff on YouTube and even apps on your phone can really benefit you. Neuroplasticity is a really burgeoning science of the mind, showing that as neurons fire together, they wire together, they fire together. What that means essentially is that our thoughts create our reality, not just in manifesting stuff we want, but in creating health or disease. As we think, as above, so below. And I can't, again, this is another topic I can just present on its own, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get this under control and have balance in your lives, folks. It's okay to take time for yourself and really work on you and your affirmations in your life. It's very important. We tend to lose sight of that when we're stuck in the day-to-day, but can't emphasize enough the importance of as above, so below. And there it is right there, great bumper sticker. Meditation, not medication. We can do so much with meditation, and it doesn't have to be difficult. You know, a couple minutes a day, and meditation can take the form of many ways. It can be playing an instrument. It can be closing your eyes and putting on some headphones and letting those binaural beats flow through your ears with noise-canceling headphones. It really does work in the context of neurofeedback, and we're just listening, sound healing. Very, very powerful. And we can meditate away a lot of our problems. And depression and anxiety do seem to benefit quite well with meditation on equal par with antidepressant and anti-anxiety drugs. The future is right here, my last slide, bioenergetic medicine. This is what I practice in my practice. This helps fill in the gaps when I don't have all the answers I get from even the functional laboratory assessments. I use bioenergetic techniques, such as the Quest device, to help my patients, because this gets really to, on the cellular level, what's going on, and helps me understand what's happening on every level, emotionally, spiritually, and physiologically. That's all I got, folks. Those of you who've stuck around, thank you so much. I talked a lot tonight, and I'm really happy to be here as long as you are here. And I see these little squares in front of me. So we can unmute everybody, or maybe one at a time, whatever you think, Bo.
Yeah, everybody's unmuted. They can go ahead and answer questions now if they want to ask questions.
Let me,
Actually, I was going to say that Quest system looks like something out of Star Trek.
Oh, it's cool. It's so cool. What it does is interfaces here with my computer, and the patient is either holding these two electrodes or these electrodes. Doesn't matter. But you see this plate right here.
Mm-hmm.
This thing is incredible. This works with quantum energy, quantum energy, and this literally, this plate will actually emit quantum frequencies based on the findings of the imbalance of the person, and then it can imprint liquid substances. I use as my base colloidal silver in the drops, in the bottles, and it also imprints gems or titanium-based stickers I can put on a painful area for somebody or on myself. What's crazy about this device is it works through quantum wave theory, and it's not bound by space and time. I've helped people in New York, California, Canada, and they have experienced significant health outcomes from it. I'm just going to leave it there. You don't believe it, I don't blame you. I get it, but understand that quantum theory is something that Einstein worked on, and Tesla before him, and it's real. And it's as real as prayer. And if you accept, prayer as a valid healing, modality, then why not accept quantum wave theory as healing as well?
I'm definitely into researching everything. We just did a visit last month on you were just talking about it with your God, I hate this. My medication, it throws my memory off.
Okay.
They're naturally in your body. I can't remember. Anyway, we went and visited with a doctor on that, and talked with them about the cost, and very.
Stem cells.
Stem cell. Thank you. The stem cell therapy and items along with that. So we're definitely into researching anything like that, just to make sure that we're healthier as we can be.
Good. Your stem cells are not cheap. The less expensive stem cells are the ones that come from fetal source. I believe they have limited efficacy, though. The best stem cells are the ones that come from you. Right. They can be drawn
that's what we were looking at, is from our own.
Yeah. Now, I caution you not to use bone marrow biopsy, because the amount of stem cells in bone marrow go down significantly with each decade of life. So unless you harvest your stem cells as an early childhood, your stem cells at your age now are not going to have enough. But you can get them from fat tissue. Fat being adipose tissue being very vascular, has still have a very high amount of stem cell concentration, and you can get that done in office right there, and they can harvest them like that. And you're not getting through the painful
that
process.
Was the cheaper way to go than from the placentas or any of that, was to use my husband's own.
Yeah, through adipose tissue. Yeah. Under $10,000, I would say about between $5,000 and $10,000 would be the cost of getting stem cells, what we call autologous stem cells done. They can get injected into joints, knees, shoulders, or done intravenously for, like, say, Parkinson's and things like that.
Carlos, this is Walt.
Hello.
I'm interested in diet and some sort of resource that'll put it all together using your philosophy, homework, if you will.
Tell me more, please.
Just books that you would recommend.
Oh, books.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, there are so many. I tell you, Walt, are you inclined to do to go on internet, because I could recommend, for instance, a couple of good websites you can start with.
Yeah.
Life Extension Foundation .org. If you can just Google Life Extension Foundation, they're a very good resource. You can get a lot of good information on there. You can just punch in a disease and they'll come up with a phenomenal amount of information for you. The other one I like Dr. Mercola.
Yes, I'm familiar.
He's
do that
great.
one.
Dr. Mercola is a really great resource. He's got a great website. It's very easy to work with. And he can really make a difference for you as well. Life Extension and Dr. Mercola.
Excuse me, how do you spell Mercola?
Mercola.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I wish I'd come prepared to tell you about more books. I'm just, my brain was in a whole different place. I apologize for that.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. This is how to get hold of me, and please, you're not imposing. If you want to reach out to me on email.
Brother Carlos, I got another question for you.
Yeah.
So, with regards to call them ancient herbs and spices, there's a list and there's history and the like.
Yeah.
You hear about in the scientific world, people who are still searching around the jungles of Brazil for the latest and greatest plant or bug that cures toenail fungus or whatever, you know what I mean? The search for homeopathic medicines and cures is still ongoing, correct?
Always. And even for pharmaceutical.
But how is it done in today's world? Because they're not going to be FDA approved by anybody in the jungle. How is it done?
Well, we have great ethnobotanists. Anyone here ever heard of Andrew Weil? Andrew Weil,
yeah,
he really ushered in the modern day nutraceutical industry and supplements. Harvard-trained physician back in the 1960s. He was graduated from Harvard Med School in '60. He lives in below Tucson there, and if you've ever heard of the restaurant True Foods, he inspired that menu, and he started out his, he never really practiced traditional medicine. He was an MD from Harvard, but he actually spent his formative years in medical practice in South America as an ethnobotanist. And many others like him have continued to do that. And what they do is they look for these holy grails of medicine. And many of these, understand, many of the drugs today have come out of the Amazon.
Yeah.
Digitalis, for instance, a very important cardiotonic for congestive heart failure, for instance. It came from the foxglove plant. There are a number of important drugs that came directly from the Amazon, which is the greatest source of all of these, to be honest with you. I'm blanking on a bunch of them, but there's so many. The malaria drug that you're talking about, hearing about now, hydroxyquinone, came from quinine, and we know as tonic water. Again, it's used as a drug for malaria, and may be effective for the COVID-19.
So you mean like gin and tonics could protect you from COVID-19?
Yes. My parents were right. Gin and tonics. Gin and tonics made a comeback. Millennials.
Well, the British that added the gin to the tonic because the soldiers didn't like the taste of the tonic water itself to protect them.
Let me talk about spirits for a moment, alcoholic spirits. They have a huge and rich history throughout the world. They were formulated to actually heal illnesses. Everyone here is familiar with Jägermeister. Anyone who's been to college is familiar with Jägermeister. It is a proprietary blend of no fewer than 30 to 50 very healing herbs. in Germany, designed to and to be taken at the first sign of illness, cough, intestinal problems, and everything. So the antiseptic properties of these digestives and cordials cannot be overstated. And I think they're great. I mean, I keep Jägermeister in my fridge, in my freezer.
I gotta.
You could pretty much make a beer out of anything, an alcoholic beverage out of anything.
Yeah, you really can. And so, no, the antiseptic properties are significant. I mean, what do we use for pain management back as late as the 1800s? It was whiskey, and we got that from the Scots.
Carlos?
And yes.
What do you think about reflexology? And I'm not talking about just hand and foot. I'm talking about entire body reflexology.
Yeah. So this map here, these are reflexology as well as acupuncture points. So you can stick needles in these points. You can stick needles in these points, or you can press on them with your thumb, and achieve very similar results. And that's what reflexology is.
My reflexologist could do both, but I prefer just regular reflexology for a tune-up. Of course, then you have to flush the daylights out of your body because you've loosened up all the toxins in your body.
Oh yeah, I understand. I was wondering if the bio machine, the quantum, can do that too. That was my question. Detox.
Non ho capito, Anna. Say it again.
Oh, the detox. If you can have a detox with the bio machine that you show us, the quantum.
Well, yes, the quantum device that I have, for instance, measures the electrical impulses of these meridians that we talk about. And yeah, you can minimize a lot of the detox, sort of symptoms with the proper, use of that device, because it's all about wave frequency, and we're all just electrical energy in the end anyway. But Andrew, yes, it's amazing how pressing on these points can have a significant effect on the physiology of the body. And the fact that they knew this over 5,000 years ago, means that we, in many ways, we're just having to rediscover this stuff. It works. Not to mention the fact we have a map of the entire body on our hands, as well as the sole of our feet, and also on our ears. And those, when pressed on as well, can have significant effects on the physiology of the body. Yeah. Great points. Anything else about anybody want to talk about COVID-19?
I have 2 questions, brother, if you don't mind.
Please.
So first of all, if a person has a PPO, can they have an ND as their primary physician?
Yeah, it's a little iffy. It's going to vary state by state. I don't, for instance, take
insurance to insurance. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. You were saying state to state. I said insurance by insurance, but yes, you just have to find your plan.
Correct. But reality is, so even whether we can be primary care or not on an insurance plan, it's going to determine by the plan itself. Aetna is different than Cigna, different than United. It's really unfortunate like that, but it is the case. Many of my patients just treat with me out of network, so it's going to go to the deductible, with the exception of lab work. Lab work will not go to the deductible, will actually be paid out by your insurance, as long as your insurance provider has a relationship with that lab, which SnuraQuest and LabCorp always do. So unless I use some kind of fringe laboratory like diagnostics for saliva testing, I don't have to worry about the patient going out of pocket for that.
Okay.
Medicare, by the way, is the one exception. Medicare does not acknowledge naturopathic doctors at this time. So my Medicare patients, I cannot do anything about that, including lab work.
Carlos, since we're on COVID, the high topic of the day,
punishment
for building immunity.
Yeah, everything I said about building your immunity goes right to that. So I want you to go back to thinking about the antioxidants. If you just did nothing more than take vitamin C and zinc and minimize your drinking during a time of an epidemic and minimize your stress and maximize your time outside in fresh air and sunlight, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Remember, I can't emphasize enough, you know, we're all exposed to germs all the time. We can't control them. But what we can control is our internal environment. And that's the biggest take home today. That's why I have a problem. Look at Sweden right now. Sweden is the one outlier here who did not do any of the social distancing or sequestration. They did not shut down their economy. And you know what? They just said, yes, it's all about herd immunity. And guess what? They are right in the middle of the pack as far as incidence goes. They're certainly way below Italy, and they're way below New York. And here's the other nice thing about Sweden. They don't have to worry about a second wave coming in the fall that Dr. Fauci's talking about, because they've all been exposed through herd immunity. But be honest, honestly, you know how you're all hearing right now anyway, that this has been here since probably December, if not earlier. So where were we doing those first several months? We were all getting exposed. It's all herd immunity anyway. So I'm really not worried about this second wave that they're talking about. Last point about this, the Jerusalem Post just put out last week a study, non-peer reviewed, by several physician scientists in China who showed that the COVID-19 has already mutated more than 30 times. So for us to be waiting for a vaccine in 12 to 18 months is completely illogical, because this virus, as intelligent as any other virus, has already mutated to the point where a vaccine is going to be iffy at best. Just like the flu vaccines are only, they're making an assumption that it's going to be close enough to this year's variation, but the reality is it's all based on previous year's strains anyway. So in the end, why not focus on what you can control, which is healthy living?